Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of the Millennials Are Old podcast. We remember it, so you don't have to. No, wait, that's already taken. We
And
remember
that's
it
such a good tagline
exactly, but we remember it because, we're getting old,
because
so
we're old.
exactly. A lot of people our age are actually have significant memory issues, so we
We,
have to
we
we have to
have,
remember it for them.
in fact, we are told that this episode's subject is as old now as its namesake, if not
Yes,
older.
I think it's about as old, if I'm not mistaken. But all right, but yes, this is Taylor.
And this is Brian.
Excellent. And we are two old millennials
Excellent.
reviewing arguably another Gen X film, but also possibly elder millennial film, 28 Days Later. Now, this is a movie that is about 20 years old. It was released in 2002. It actually was released in 2002 in the UK and Ireland and 2003 in the United States. So this movie's about 20 years old. So, Brian, before we get started on the other details of the film, what are your experiences with 28 Days Later?
I've seen it twice in my life. Saw it once, probably in 2004, which was also I was probably 12, 13. That's really the peak of me getting into horror, really immersing myself in it. And at the time, I was really into Romero, really into the Evil Dead films. And then I saw this again 2 days ago. At the time that I first saw this, I did not like it. I think I was really considering myself being like, I like the good old horror, and it felt felt very much. I felt at the time like it was filmed like an action film, which I still kind of think, but now I don't really mind it. I didn't like the fast zombies, which I don't know why. In retrospect, that seems stupid. I watched it for the second time 2 days ago or whatever, and I had a lot of fun with it. Had a lot of the same issues that I remember with it. It's just that I'm like older and not as much of a dickhead now. So I'm like, yeah, it's fine.
No, I don't know if I had a negative impression when I first watched it, but I remember not particularly being the biggest fan of it. It is a
Yeah,
movie that really did stick in my memory though, and I've been meaning to rewatch it because, like you, I actually think. So you said you watched it when you were about 12 or 13.
yeah, roughly.
I think I watched it when I was about 14 or 15, so roughly the same, because I remember watching this probably like 2006, 2007, so I would have been 13 or 14.
Right.
Um, and this is a movie that I do think, and not to spoil my opinions too much on it, but I do think it's a movie that I think has aged extremely well. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's a movie that, even though it was one of the first major films shot in digital, I think its visual style is actually very striking and is actually very distinct in comparison to a lot of movies released at the time. And also, frankly, this movie is very much of a trendsetter. In fact,
Oh yeah.
I don't really want to get too much into the show because it's finally now over as of like 2 weeks ago. But let's just say The Walking Dead ripped off quite a few things from this movie. Having watched The Walking Dead very recently and having rewatched this movie for the first time in a decade and a half, let's just say there were a lot of similarities with The Walking Dead in this movie. But to be fair, this movie came out like almost a decade before The Walking Dead did, so obviously there wasn't this movie ripping off that. But
Well, and like not to like, but I mean, I've only seen like the first season of The Walking Dead, which is what happened with me with most of those old prestige shows.
yeah.
But I mean, to be fair, I mean, 28 Days Later, I haven't seen sequels ever. This one kind of goes along the marks, and it is like kind of like this is like a new millennium take on this kind of Romero-esque thing. And at the time that I was a kid, I think that's part of what I hated about it. Now I kind of like it. Now I think it's almost self-consciously like this is like very much like a zombie film for a new era, which I think now sits well with me. At the time, I hated it. So I guess it's possible that at least some of those core elements probably are just zombie commonalities.
Yes,
I didn't like The Walking Dead at all.
Oh yeah, no, that's totally fine. It's a show that is extremely hit or miss. I haven't watched the very last season, and then after that, no more Walking Dead stuff. I'm not gonna do the spinoff, none of that shit. I'm just gonna finish it because I only got one season left. And that's it.
You're not going to watch the Chris Hardwick talk show, The Talking Dead?
I've always found Chris Hardwick to be very distasteful, and then I found out when he got Me Too.
You don't
I'm like,
say.
oh, I knew it. I knew he was distasteful.
Shocking. Couldn't believe that that fucking the Star Trek kid's creepy little hanger-on friend was a pervert. Who would have known?
No, fucking exactly. But yes, going back to the movie here. But yes, very much so. This movie was very much a trendsetter for the zombie genre and arguably restarted the zombie trend that went on for the next decade after.
Yeah, did this come out before the Dawn of the Dead remake?
Yes, it did, because Dawn of the Dead remake came out, I believe, in 2004.
I think so.
And also Dawn of the Dead
really did kickstart that zombie revival thing.
Oh no, for sure. Even though technically they're not really zombies in this movie, but that's not here.
What the fuck ever.
Exactly. Who cares, right? But yes, get into some more details here. This movie was rated R. Very unsurprisingly, was rated R. It was directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland. Now, Danny Boyle is most well known for many movies, including Trainspotting and Trainspotting 2. Of course, this film, 28 Days Later. Slumdog Millionaire. The movie.
I feel like there's a Danny Boyle film that I like. Like I know that his name is like sticking in my memory for something, but I don't know what.
He also directed the film 127 Hours, which is the movie where another famous Me Too person, James Franco, cuts off his own arm after being trapped in a rock.
Another shocker. Who would have guessed that James Franco? You know,
yeah, right.
Of all the guys, it's always the ones who least suspect.
Exactly.
Even Schmorky.
Yes. He also directed the Michael Fassbender and Sorkin Steve Jobs movie, not the one with Ashton Kutcher. Speaking of somebody who has done the opposite of Me Too, Ashton Kutcher.
Sorkin, Sorkin is going to get Me Too.
Oh, for sure, no question.
Just from like a writing standpoint.
Yeah. But those are some of the films he's most well known for. And Alex Garland is most known for writing the screenplays of, once again, 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later, and a few other movies he's written the screenplay. And he also directed the films Dread, Ex Machina, Annihilation, and Brian's favorite movie of 2022, Men.
Oh my fucking God.
Yeah.
I implore anyone out there to see Men if you can see it for free, because it's such dog shit, and I don't know how to explain it to you if you don't see it. It is such bullshit. I hate that fucking, because he did a Mother too, which is the exact same thing. The exact same fucking pretentious bullshit that, never, sorry.
No, it's okay. I knew when I saw that, I knew I had to bring it up, because I knew you'd have a pretty viscerally negative reaction to this.
One of the worst fucking things I've seen in a long time.
The movie is about 113 minutes long. The movie has a budget of $8 million and grossed $85.7 million. So very clearly this was a box office success. And it was also a critical success. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has an 87% critic score and an 85% audience score. So both critics and audiences both agree this is a modern classic.
And for a horror film, to get like contemporary reviews that are that positive and audience reviews, I mean, pretty uncommon.
Oh no, for sure. I honestly can't think of a lot of, especially the early 2000s, because the early 2000s was like a pretty dire time in horror. Was definitely not a great time for horror movies in general.
And certainly critically, it's like not a time when a lot of critics were paying mind to the genre.
Critically, I mean, one of the most classic horror movies the 2000s saw has like, I think, a 45% on Rotten Tomatoes or something. Like, that was not a very critically well-reviewed movie. But now we see it as a classic, obviously. But
yeah.
All right. But yeah, without further ado, let's get on to some trivia here. So first trivia fact here is this film was shot almost entirely in sequence, which is very rare among movie productions.
Really?
Yeah. So a lot of people who may not know at home listening to this, most movies are shot out of sequence due to budget, time, shooting locations, etc. But this movie was actually shot almost entirely in sequence. Only a couple pickups and a few reshoots were shot out of sequence.
That's interesting, because this is a fairly high concept movie,
Yeah, a very high concept, yes.
This isn't like Reservoir Dogs or Night of the Living Dead, which takes place in a single set,
Yeah, no, for sure, absolutely. And like, especially considering some of the shooting locations as well, like the fact they were able to all shoot it in sequence is actually pretty amazing. So speaking of, next fact I have here, for the scenes on the motorway when they're driving from London to Manchester, The production got permission to shoot on the M1, which is one of the major highways in the UK, on a Sunday morning between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. The police gradually slowed traffic in both directions. Using 10 cameras, the filmmakers managed to capture a total of 1 minute of usable footage, which is like crazy. That would be like if fucking like in Los Angeles, if they closed down one of the major highways in Los Angeles for 2 hours just so they could shoot a movie. Like, that's insane.
For like 45 seconds of footage.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be so pissed off.
Yeah. You're late
People's
for work.
People's whole day has been displaced, yeah.
Yeah. Shit. Next fact here is Alex Garland and Danny Boyle did a great deal of research into social unrest, drawing ideas from things that had happened in Rwanda and Sierra Leone, such as the piling of bodies inside churches, but drew the line that using any actual footage from such incidents in the opening monologue montage. Yeah. All footage featuring dead bodies / desecration of bodies was faked, thankfully.
I would hope so.
You know, some movies definitely do use real like fucking genocide footage for like shock.
I've definitely seen that in like Mondo films and shit. Pretty disgusting.
Oh no, for sure, absolutely. But I'm glad they faked it. But you know, you can take inspiration. But yeah, let's fake things just a little bit.
Yeah. And actually, when you had suggested this movie, because again, it wasn't a movie that made much of a strong impression on me. My big interest in it was looking backwards, because I always take away is the Romero influence. And I was thinking like, oh, I wonder if when I rewatch this now, if I'll see any sort of social anxiety subtext. That's but for, you know, the 2000s of post 9/11 or whatever, as opposed to the Romero era. So it's interesting to hear that, you know, they were looking at Sierra Leone and things like that, and how that might play in.
And I'm sorry, Brian, did you say post 9/11?
I did.
So fun fact. The next trivia fact is about 9/11.
I did that on purpose.
Yes, exactly. Brian definitely read the script before I said this fact, but no, he did not read the script.
I always read the script.
Yeah. But yes, the next trivia fact is actually about 9/11. So the scene where Jim, Selena celebrate with Frank at the grocery store was actually shot on 9/11.
Ironically, the celebration scene.
Danny Boyle said it felt extremely strange to shoot a celebratory scene on that particular day, which I can imagine is very interesting. By the way, at the audience, that was the complete coincidence. Brian did not read the fucking script. It's actually hilarious that it was related to 9/11 here.
We have good chemistry. That's what it is.
Fucking hilarious. And the final trivia fact here, and this one's actually one of the more interesting ones in my opinion. The hospital in the film, the one where we first see Jim, played by Cillian Murphy, is a real day hospital, open only during the week. The trust managers of the hospital hire out the building to filmmakers for weekends, and the productions pay the hospital directly. So, which I think is very interesting. So in the UK, of course, they have the NHS, which is universal healthcare, but they also do have like charitable things you could donate to various hospitals. So that's how this particular hospital makes money on the weekends. So very interesting.
Pretty neat. So did you see anything as this hospital in other films? Is that a thing they do?
You know, I did not look into that, but I would not be surprised if that was the fact. But
and also just a lot of on location shooting in this for a sequentially shot film.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting for sure. But yes, without further ado, let's get into the synopsis of this film. So I'm not going to get super deep into the woods because it's a film that has beats and you don't really need to explain it too much, in my opinion. But I think the symbolism does need to be discussed, but not the actual scene, I think. So the beginning of the film, a highly contagious, aggression-inducing virus called Rage is unleashed in Great Britain after an infected chimpanzee is freed from a laboratory in Cambridge by a group of animal liberation activists. And during this scene, we see a monkey tied to a table watching like footage of atrocities and genocides on television.
One thing that I would say dates this movie pretty significantly, one of the only things is like what an early 2000s thing to be afraid of is like the animal liberation groups.
Yeah, it is honestly a little
Like, I'm not
grunt
upset by it.
inducing.
I'm not offended. It's just kind of like, looking backwards, it's like of all the things you could have been worried about in the coming decades.
Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, you see a monkey tied to the table. You see one monkey just like vivisected, so, like cut up and open. You see monkeys just like getting angry, and the scientists just like don't let them out. They have a thing. It's gonna kill everybody. And then of course they let the monkey out. It rips up some lady, and she is victim number one of the disease. Now,
Well, that opening scene actually spawned a whole popular YouTube sub community.
is that the monkey hate one, or is that?
Yeah, it was spawned from the opening scene of 28 Days Later.
It probably fucking was, to be honest. But I did want to mention something. So you talked about the sort of like the very dated thing about being scared of animal liberation activists, which I actually do agree with quite a bit. But I do find it interesting because this movie actually does pinpoint to something that actually is something to worry about in the scientific community, is that scientists have recreated various diseases in labs and tested them on animals, and some of the animals have actually escaped. That has actually happened before.
Yeah, it's pretty disconcerting.
Yeah, I mean I think they recreated like some disease. It was like measles or like some horrible disease that they put on animals to just because they wanted to recreate a disease. Like this is a thing that actually happened in a lab somewhere. So the idea that animals escaping from a lab and then spreading, animal to human contact is not like that. It's actually a pretty real fear that should be taken seriously. And also
just in general, a pretty legitimately, morally, and ethically weird thing to do. Obviously we want to learn about diseases and study them. I don't know, that's a whole bigger can of worms, I guess.
No, exactly. And like, even though this is not necessarily a proven theory, but at the same time, we do need to bring this up because this movie is relevant to post-COVID, because the special features of this movie did really predict COVID in a lot of ways.
When you kind of brought that up to me, because I was already whenever we do these, we talk about what our topics are going to be. The first thing my head starts doing is I start kind of thinking, well, what are the like kind of the sociology things or whatever that I want to think about this. So when you said that, first I thought about the Romero thing and the post 9/11 thing, and then when you said that to me, I actually, even though I should have, it's about a pandemic, that had not occurred to me at all. And then when you said that, it just opened up this whole other perspective, I guess, on the movie to me that I don't know if I've seen anyone talk about yet.
No, for sure. And like, and this does need to be brought up because it is a theory that exists, is the COVID-19 lab leak theory that COVID escaped from a lab in Wuhan, China in late 2019, which, considering that COVID-19 started out as the Wuhan virus, there is a very prominent, medical research and disease research facility in Wuhan. I don't know. Yeah. It's certainly possible. Let's be honest here. It's very possible.
Anyone, and this is not what our podcast is about. People who know me as a Terry Mills, I'm pretty open to a certain degree of like. I think I'm healthily open to a lot of conspiracy theories from a kind of what I consider like a materialist lens. So I think that's a thing that's at least good to be aware of.
Yes, and we're not saying that is the leading theory of where COVID-19 started for sure, but it is a very prominent theory, and it should at least be observed and examined, I think.
Yeah.
But no, for sure. I mean, like, so going back to the special features thing, like there was the making of special feature was mostly about how, due to increased travel, due to lower regulatory standards when it comes to how meat is produced and cleaned, just in general, the fact that, animal to human transmission of diseases is one of the primary vectors of how disease gets spread in the first place. Like we are, we're always just a generation away from having a world-ending pandemic. And the fact that this movie was made in 2001, they're talking about disease coming in about 20 years, and then in 2019, 2020, we get COVID. It's just crazy. It genuinely is just like it was like when that guy after World War I was like, oh yeah, the Versailles Treaty is a 20-year, like, stasis on a world war, and then like it happened 20 fucking years later.
Chilling. Like it is a little chilling.
It's just like yeah, this movie is honestly quite prophetic in that way, to be honest. But yes, let's get back into the synopsis here, because we could talk about theories all day, but let's get into the
we really could. We gotta cut this off at the butt or whatever.
But after the opening scene, the disease presumably spreads rapidly and becomes an epidemic, resulting in societal collapse in Great Britain. 28 days after the initial outbreak, roughly, bicycle courier Jim, played by Cillian Murphy, awakens from a coma in St. Thomas Hospital in London, which has been deserted. Now, that is a scene that is a direct ripoff, or Walking Dead directly ripped that off, because although in The Walking Dead, he was in the hospital for 6 weeks, not 4 weeks. So, you know, it's not the same.
But they made it their own. It's, how many days later is that?
42 days later.
42 days later. So why don't you hold on to your bicycles?
Exactly. And also to the ladies and same-sex attracted gentlemen at home who want to watch this movie, Cillian Murphy is naked a lot in this movie. And the first scene you see of Cillian Murphy is just full frontal naked Cillian Murphy.
This hot guy, not quite my head, but I mean, he's not a bad-looking guy.
Oh, no, for sure. Not at all. So, yeah, you see full frontal, and then you see his ass very quickly after that. So, definitely a guy who's not afraid to bear it all in movies, that's for sure.
And I wish they kept that scene where he showed dick in Batman Begins.
Yeah. They showed it in the special features, actually, which is hilarious.
They're like, his Scarecrow was like, I know what your greatest fear is.
Yeah.
My dick, Batman.
Oh, yeah, he was in Batman.
Yeah.
Which one was that? Batman Begins. That's right. That's right.
That was the last Batman movie that I really liked, I think.
That's hilarious. Damn.
That wasn't animated, whatever.
No, fair enough. But Jim walks around in abandoned London looking for any sign of people. Now, this was a fact I didn't put in the trivia, but they actually did close off a good amount of downtown London for a little bit.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's just fucking crazy, obviously. Like they did that in another prominent Tom Cruise movie where they like shut down Times Square for a day to shoot a movie where there's like an abandoned scene with him running around Times Square. But even then, like shutting down London for like even a day just to film a movie is like, that's probably where half the budget of the fucking movie went. Like,
as a like adolescent nerd, I remember thinking, "Yo, that's so cool. That's such a like brand." Now, as like an adult that commutes to work and has to be downtown, 60 hours out of the week, and when I'm there, I can't be at home, and I treasure all my time not there. That just makes me think, what a bunch of bullshit.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with that. But it is genuinely one of the most striking scenes in a modern movie.
That's just rewatching it now.
Yeah, he's walking around one of the largest cities in the world, completely abandoned, just trash on the ground, just yelling for anybody. It's a genuinely very, like I said, very haunting scene in a modern movie.
Yeah, when I got to that scene on my recent rewatch, I remember thinking, "Oh, I didn't like this when I was a kid," because I really did not like this movie. When I first saw it, and I was thinking, "How did I not like this scene? Did I just not have a sense of like
scale and scope?"
Yeah, that's what I think it must have been.
No, absolutely. I think I probably felt. I remember not like disliking it scene, but I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. But nowadays, I'm like, holy shit, they actually did that.
It feels so eerie. Yeah, it feels very lonely.
Yeah. Eventually, Jim makes his way to his church, where he is chased by some of the infected. Now, there's actually a very interesting. So, talk about theories. There's a very interesting theory that I saw on YouTube earlier, where Jim, throughout the movie, is essentially looking for a protective father-like figure. And so, first, it's he wakes up, finds the priest. He finds other people. We'll get into that later. And then eventually, at the very end, he becomes his own man and protector at the very end by standing up for the people that he loves and cares about that are still left. And I think this is interesting. So, like, the first person he goes to as like a protector-like figure is his local priest.
Yeah.
And, of course, he finds no salvation there. And, of course, he's confused. He doesn't know what's going on. He sees the infected, and he's like, oh, shit, I gotta go. And he runs off. And is also a very haunting scene as well, because I think we haven't really talked too much, but this movie's like very well shot. The shot
Yeah.
composition's great. The lighting's amazing. It's a movie that makes you feel, especially at the very beginning, makes you feel extremely isolated.
And one of the things, just thinking about how watching this now, I felt kind of embarrassed by not like not even seeing. When I first saw this, I remember one of my big criticisms in my head was thinking, "Oh, it's shot like a video game or like an action movie." And watching that now I'm like, "What the fuck was I thinking? Like, what a pretentious asshole! Like, no idea what I was talking about because it's not shot like that at all."
No, it really isn't. It really
it's
isn't.
like, no, it's very tasteful.
It is. It is. While Jim is running away from the church, he's rescued by survivor Selena, played by Naomi Harris, and Mark, played by Noah Huntley. Now, Mark doesn't play a very prominent role in this movie. He gets killed almost immediately, but I wanted to put the actor credits in here, of course. At Jim's request, the group travels to his parents' house in Deptford, where he learns that they had committed suicide. Now, interestingly enough, so I saw, as Brian is very well aware, I used to work in a funeral home. And I can just tell by the way those bodies looked, they had not been dead very long. They had probably been dead for maybe at max a couple days, which I honestly think makes that scene even more horrifying, because they're only a couple days away from seeing their son again, and they died with thinking the knowledge that their son had died, which is a very obviously very tragic thing to think. And they also have a note on because they died by drinking, taking pills, etc., but they holding a picture of their son with a note on the back of it that was saying that, "We know you're asleep, son, don't wake up." And he breaks down in tears, and that was a really hard scene to watch, honestly.
I've probably harkened back to this throughout the episode, so apologies, but comparing this now, this is a pretty, emotionally pretty pregnant scene. And I just think the whole time watching this, I don't know if I just didn't, I wasn't clearly not as emotionally intelligent as I thought I was. I was thinking you don't actually see things like that in this kind of horror movie very often. It's pretty.
There are a couple scenes in The Walking Dead like that, but they are very few and far between, which is very unfortunate. Something that series could have done a lot and could have taken more inspiration from this movie to do. Just being honest.
Well, they also had more time to do it too, so it's surprising that they didn't take advantage of that.
It really is.
And this part kind of, would you say that this is a continuation of he's now going to another place where he's looking for protection or salvation and isn't finding it?
So he goes to his priest, doesn't find it. He tries to go to his literal parents, and they're dead. So of course that was a dead end on that one. But yes, that night at the house, Mark gets a cut in his arm, which is hit with infected blood during an attack, prompting Selena to kill him before he turns. And that was also a pretty rough scene to watch, because she just cuts off his arm and hacks him to death with a machete. And
she's been at it for long enough. She kind of knows what's going on, is what we're led to infer from that.
Exactly. And the general hypothesis among the infection known as rage throughout the movie is that it only takes about 10 or 20 seconds to turn. So once somebody gets blood in any orifice or get a bite or anything, you're done. You're just fucking done.
Yeah, no time to contemplate, no time to carry on along or argue.
Exactly. It's just over. They leave the house, and Jim and Selena encounter cab driver Frank, played by the actor Brendan Gleeson, and his daughter Hannah at Belfrin Tower, which I had to look up online, and I remember was like, that sounds familiar. I looked up a picture. It's one of the most famous apartment complexes in London. It's a completely brutalist style public housing project. That I might send you pictures later. It's a very fascinating looking building.
Please do.
And there's a really excellent scene, because in the movie it's there's a square staircase that goes up 30 floors or whatever, and their apartment's on one of the taller floors. And as they're walking through it, they see zombies coming at them, and they're trying to run up, and Frank has a fucking battle armor set that some gamer incel would have or whatever. He's I'm gonna protect these people, and he does, which is pretty cool.
Well, this movie is probably the reason all those guys got that. So they're when this happens, sure, I'll be prepped.
Exactly. They learn of a military broadcast offering protection at a blockade in Manchester. With supplies dwindling, Frank asks Jim and Selena to accompany him and Hannah to the blockade, which they do accept. Now, many people may not know, London is quite far away from Manchester, so especially having to drive in an abandoned England with probably a bunch of cars blocking the way, it's a pretty daunting task. But they decide to take a risk anyways. The group travels to Manchester in Frank's cab, having many women's, and I put this as a note, having many whimsical adventures along the way, including having to go through a tunnel and surviving a bunch of zombies chasing them at the last minute. Them going to a grocery store, which I allude to was shot on 9/11. Going just grocery shopping, finding, perishable and non-perishable supplies they clearly need. And they also stop at an abandoned farmstead where Jim kills his first zombie, and he's very clearly regretful of it because he kills a boy.
If it'd been a girl, it would have been better.
Exactly.
I agree.
But also this scene, I think, actually, so you talk about the social anxiety element. I think there's also maybe the opposite of social anxiety. I think Jim is trying to find a community in a completely abandoned, isolated world. Because during this scene, there's a very minor moment in the film where he thinks that the group is lost and he looks like he's about to have a panic attack. So
okay.
So I think he's trying to, in some vain way, trying to recreate some sort of
some
community.
Approximation of a community or
Exactly. Yeah. So I do think that's actually maybe the opposite of social anxiety to a certain extent. But there might be some social anxiety subtext in there somewhere.
Oh, I just meant social anxiety, in the sense of anxieties of society, rather than literally, anxieties of being social. Sorry.
Oh, no, for sure. For
sure. So I guess this is going to time to bring it up and say, what do you think of the look of the not zombies in this? What do you think of the overall design?
Are you talking about the character design, or are you talking about
of the zombies? What do you think of that style? It's kind of
I think they look great. I think because they have blood pouring out of their fucking mouths and noses. They got red bloodshot eyes. I mean, it almost looks like rabies.
Yeah, that's what was my thought rewatching it too, is they did a good job distinguishing it from the actual decomposing zombie thing that you expect. Of course, these aren't zombies, I know, but they're zombies.
Well, and that's the thing. It's good that they tried to and I think they tried to recreate rabies, because rabies is also arguably the most deadly disease in world history. It's a disease that once you get it, it is almost impossible to survive. And it's also a disease that causes you to essentially, your mind dissolves, become rabid. You start attacking people, you've seen a rabid fucking animal. That's essentially what rabies does to people too. So yeah, definitely, I think they did a very good job with the zombie design for sure.
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, I was bored by it. And now watching it, I'm like, oh, this is something really interesting. It's something, it's a take on this that I really have not seen before. You can tell that they worked on making it look like a person with an illness. And still making it unsettling,
For sure. As the group struggles to plot their next move, Frank is infected when a drop of blood falls into his eye. Soldiers arrive shortly afterwards and kill Frank. So that was the other father figure that was killed in front of Jim's eyes, essentially. And, Frank is, of course, literally a father to Hannah. So, once again, he's looking for a manly father-like figure. And every single time they just get they horribly die somehow or end up trying to kill him.
They should have used the song Father Figure by George Michael. And that's, the unsettling kind of, homosexual love song. I will be your father figure. I think it would have been good.
Absolutely. The soldiers bring the remaining survivors to a fortified mansion under the command of Henry West, played by Christopher Eccleston. Now, some people may not know, he was one of the Doctor Who's. But to me, he always looks like a bad guy. So when I saw him, oh, that's right, that's the bad guy of the movie.
Yeah. No, he's got Snidely Whiplash face.
He really does. However, the safety promised by the soldiers turns out to be a ruse when West reveals to Jim that the broadcast, because of course he was the one that did the broadcast telling people to come to Manchester, was intended to lure female survivors into sexual slavery to repopulate the world. Now, my whole thing is, considering that society has collapsed, there's very few people alive left in this part of the world. Presumably, a lot of them have been evacuated, but of course, a lot of them have presumably died as well. The idea that there would be a military presence of men going around just raping women and putting them in sexual servitude, that sounds completely possible.
Yeah, no, that is 100% a thing that already exists in countries where the US and lots of other countries have a military presence. I see no reason to exist. I'm not making light that it would absolutely be a thing that happened. It would be probably one of the main concerns in any sort of post-apocalypse scenario.
No, for sure. And yeah, we're not being glib when we say that. Like, we're being real. This would absolutely fucking happen.
Yeah.
And we're not even talking about the West. In any country with a military.
Any mass extinction level event, whether it was a zombie outbreak or climate change, that is, it's just a thing in developing or third world countries or whatever. It's just a fact of life for a lot of people.
Yeah. The mansion has a this is the note I made. The mansion has a very interesting social dynamic, including a chained up infected soldier, a soldier in female clothing as the head chef of the house. And my favorite of these soldiers is Sergeant Farrell, who is the most reluctant member of this group. He's the one that pontificates upon human nature, evolution, world history, and also he pontificates on the idea that Great Britain was essentially, once the rage virus got out, the entire world just quarantined the whole fucking place and let everybody just rot, which in my opinion is probably what happened. I don't think that the rage virus probably made it significantly throughout the world, mainly because it's a disease that once again presents itself immediately. And it's also something that even if one had gotten across the channel or wherever somehow, people would have fucking heard about it by the time consequences had happened. So it would have been taken care of pretty much immediately. So I do think that Great Britain was quarantined.
That was my favorite part of this movie, is that I got to live in a fantasy where the UK was quarantined from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I didn't have to worry about hearing their voices, hearing them call breakfast brekkie.
Yeah, I didn't have to worry about getting fucking jellied eels with my toad in the hole as a
some motherfucker being like, "Oh, blood sausage is so good."
I can't wait to English. I can't wait to put beans on toast. Like, man, fuck off, dude.
No, beans are fine on their own. Get the fuck out of here.
But yes. So we will get to the rest of the details after this commercial break. We will be right back. All right, with commercials out of the way, let's get back into the plot synopsis. So the soldiers attempt to kill Jim after he refuses to be complicit with their plan. But Jim escapes but unfortunately Farrell does not make it. Now, once again, Sergeant Farrell was my favorite of the soldiers by quite a bit. He was the one with really any kind of sense of morality or ethics.
Any sort of characterization beyond just being like an absolute sadist.
Yeah, I think honestly, so I think Major West, has a little bit of that, but it's extremely cynical. He's simply doing this. I mean, I would argue, obviously, he probably is totally fine with turning women into sex slaves, but I think he is ultimately doing this for cynical reasons to try to keep a mostly, fucking just probably all that not committed regiment of soldiers on his side by simply giving them what he feels they desire.
And maybe able to give it some sort of give the rest of them like an ideological sort of veneer to being, a roving gang.
Exactly. After luring West away from the mansion after Jim escapes, Jim releases Private Mailer, who was the guy who was chained up earlier, which I thought was really interesting. So we didn't really get too much into it, but yeah, they have a fucking a soldier with the rage chained up in the laundry area or the drying area, wherever the fucking whatever.
And
anyway.
This is really what I remembered for years after seeing it. This was the scene that even when I didn't like this movie stuck with me, and still now watching, I thought was really effective.
Yes,
kind of like the centerpiece for me of the movie and its themes, of everything that works about it.
Yes. But yeah, they have him chained up essentially to monitor various things about him. They're trying to see how long it takes for him to starve to death. They're trying to see that, probably, fucking aggravating him to see what kind of reactions he has. So essentially he's just being used as a giant science experiment, which does
They're doing
harken back to the monkey things.
Yeah.
Exactly, which I think is very interesting. But after Jim releases the soldier ends up ripping apart a lot of them. Of course, some of them get killed in other ways. Jim, Selena, and Hannah attempt to leave in Frank's cab after Jim fucking gouges one of the guy's eyes out, which is a pretty gnarly to watch scene.
Pretty gnarly, especially because like horror in the early 2000s, especially on this level, was pretty tame. It's getting back to like horror in the 2020s. So weird to say that. Jesus Christ, I'm old.
Yeah.
Hence the name of the show, I guess. But,
yeah.
Because horror right now, you see a lot of stuff like Barbarian, you see, X and Pearl. And actually, not a horror film. We saw Violent Night last night. The violence in mainstream movies in this decade so far, this is 2022 as a record, pretty wild. But in the early 2000s, it was not. Like this. It was very clean and sanitized. So that scene really does stand out in this film.
No, for sure. And like when Jim escapes, to go back to the mansion and save Selena and Hannah, he basically just turns into fucking Rambo. He turns into the twink Rambo, which is the best way I can describe it.
Which is a movie that I've been dreaming of for so long.
Yeah.
I was literally just talking with someone about how, like, I find Timothée Chalamet, like, really a kind of, like, boring and sometimes even annoying. But he does look cool. Like, he is, like, a hot guy with good style. And I was literally thinking it would be cool if someone just put Chalamet in, like, a Rambo film. He just played that kind of guy, totally straight-faced.
Yeah, right.
Like, I would love that. I would love if action heroes looked like that.
I mean, it would basically be what Jim does in this, like in the last act of this movie. So, and also I think, so there is a little bit of a romantic thing between Selena and Jim, which I wasn't the biggest fan of, to be honest. I don't really like movies that make romantic leads out of situations like this. But hey, whatever, it happens.
Well,
also,
she says like she kind of like even jokes about it when she's like, "Oh, did you think we would fuck?"
Yeah, no, exactly. Although
but the first time they do it,
yeah. Although I will say another thing, The Walking Dead ripped off. Rick eventually ends up getting married. Well, not legally married, of course, but hooking up and shacking up with Michonne, a black woman. So this movie was the inspiration for that in The Walking Dead, I bet, somehow.
Wow, that's a very specific thing to rip off.
It is, but you know what? That's the thing, though. The Walking Dead did rip off quite a few things from this movie, so I would not be surprised if they also ripped. I'm just kidding. But although to be fair, the comic books came out first, so I wouldn't be surprised if the guy who made those comic books ripped it off. But nonetheless, either way. But yeah, so Jim, Selena, and Hannah, after taking out the entire mansion, attempt to leave in Frank's cab, but West had snuck into the back seat of the cab and shoots Jim. He was the only survivor at this point. Hannah retaliates by putting the cab in reverse. Now, at this point, she has been drugged by Selena willingly so that she does not experience the trauma of rape, which is, that's it's an interesting sentence you have to put in a movie review.
Yeah.
And also, by the way, to the audience at home who may not realize, Hannah's also a child in this movie, which makes it even more horrifying.
I guess we may not have been back there. This is a bleak movie, and I don't think, again, even as a kid, that stuck with me, because this is a dumbass kid. And that's the thing that I think, as an update of the Romero films, this does really, like, this is a pretty bleak view of the future that kind of bears out when you look at, I think, like, a material analysis of, possibly of, like the worst parts of human nature.
No, for sure, absolutely. So, no, I totally agree with that. But yeah, that is the thing I did need to mention. So they're going to make both Selena and a child a sex slave in this universe. But yes, Hannah retaliates by putting the cab in reverse, allowing the once again chained up soldier who's now free, who is also one of the good guys in this movie because he killed like half the soldiers, to pull West through the window. Dorner. Yeah, exactly. But he pulls West through the rear window of the cab and kills him, while the other three survivors drive off. Now, interestingly enough, I did want to mention this. So, in the original ending, so in the Blu-ray copy I have of this movie, has three endings. So, one of them was the original ending. So, the original ending was after Jim gets shot by West, they Selena and Hannah drive to another abandoned hospital where they put him on the gurney, try to revive him, and he dies. Which I honestly think is actually a more coherent ending to this movie. Although I don't like it as much. But it is a more coherent ending because the movie begins with him waking up, essentially, seeing all the men and father figures and like savior figures that he wants is like dying. He becomes a savior for himself, and then while saving others, he dies himself.
It actually makes that like a complete, not that it's an incomplete arc, I suppose, the other way, but it really brings all of the imagery and the themes kind of together, maybe more.
Yes. So even though I don't, it's not near, for me, it's not as satisfying ending, but it is a more like narratively coherent ending, I think. But yes, let's get back to the theatrical ending. So after another 28 days, Jim fully recovers at a remote college in northwest England. Now, interestingly enough, this is one of the few, and we didn't get into this earlier, but I will started getting into this now. So this movie has been theorized as being shot like a dream. The movie starts off with
in our messages, and I had not thought of this. I'm very interested to hear this.
So this movie was shot, as I mentioned earlier in the trivia, this movie was shot on digital film. Now, digital film was, of course, a very new media of film. I believe the very first film ever shot on digital with a wide theatrical release, and by wide I mean like more than like 1 or 2 screens, was the movie The Last Broadcast, which is also arguably one of the first found footage movies.
It's a great film. I love The Last Broadcast.
I do too, but that's a movie with a terrible ending.
Yeah, I just think it's so. I mean, it's very inventive when you look at the compared to the films from when it came out.
Oh no, for sure. But this movie is shot in digital. Now, this movie on high definition TVs, which I did watch this on. The movie, honestly, frankly, looks kind of bad for the most part.
Yeah.
But I do think so. There's a theory on why it kind of looks bad with high definition. So it is shot in digital, but I do believe that the movie was shot with the intention of it looking like a dream. There's a lot of very faded colors. The movie is shot very like strikingly not like real life. It's almost kind of shot like almost like kind of like a graphic novel a little bit in certain shots. With very stark contrast lighting. There's a scene where Mailer is chasing one of the soldiers to the mansion. He's running and screaming, and you see Mailer chase after him. And it's shot like a comic panel.
Oh, I need to go back and I know the scene you read now. I think I should go back and rewatch it after we record.
Yeah,
this.
like it's like a black and white comic panel. So like one side's purely black because it's dark at night, and the other side's illuminated with the characters. So I think this movie was shot like a dream. And there's actually a very distinct shot in the middle of the movie where they're driving through the countryside, and you see there is like a pan over of what I assume are like tulips or something. And it looks like you're looking at it through like frosted glass or something, which is how you would oftentimes see something like that in a dream.
Yeah.
And then at the very end of the movie with the last scene where they're at the remote the remote cottage, you see it's one of the few scenes in the movie that's actually shot incredibly clear because he's waking up from a bad dream.
Okay. Yeah.
So in my opinion, I think the vast majority of this movie, from Jim waking up all the way to at the very end where Jim wakes up after he's recovered, I think is essentially shot like a bad dream.
Yeah, I'd never heard that before. I thought of that, but as soon when you said that to me earlier today, I was like, huh. And now thinking back, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of like it's all stuff that as you say it, it's like clicking with me, and then like there's scenes that I think I want to go back and watch again with that in mind now.
And you see after of course, like I said, the footage is now much clearer and it's a much more hopeful ending. There's no obvious signs of decay. You don't see a lot of tragedy. It's just people living a fairly happy life in a remote cottage somewhere. Like it's not a nightmare anymore.
Yeah.
We are now back to a stable reality for Jim. So that's why I think, like I said, I think this movie is essentially from when he wakes up all the way to when he recovers is essentially like a bad dream somebody would have. Although of course I think the events in this movie did happen, but
no, it's
yeah,
just as like an aesthetic choice, and
exactly. And the final scene of the movie, a finished fighter jet flies overhead the cottage, and Jim, Selena, and Hannah unfurl a huge cloth banner saying the word hello, which is, of course, the first words that Jim says in the movie when he's looking for people in London. He yells, hello! Yeah. Hello!
That's a good tie together. I like that.
The three survivors optimistically watch the jet as the pilot spots them. And that is the end of the theatrical cut. Not the original ending, but the theatrical cut of the film. And before we get into more of our thoughts of the film, I did want to say the other two endings, because I think the other two endings are also very interesting. So this is going back to the dream thing. In another ending, the outbreak is revealed to be a dream. Now, that's a terrible fucking ending.
That sucks.
So
it's like a joke.
I'm really glad that they alluded to it being a dream and not actually being a dream.
Well, yeah.
Because that's obvious. The alluding to the dream and having the visual flair of a dream is, I think, much more effective than just being like, oh, yeah, it was all a dream. Like, that sucks. So,
I had not heard of this ending before, but now that you said that, that sucks so hard. I almost wonder, because this is post Scream 2 getting leaked. You know about that, obviously.
Yes, it is definitely post
Scream 2 gets leaked. At the last minute, they had to change the script significantly. A lot of people think that it makes the final movie suffer. And I almost wonder, is that a fake out ending? Like, is that, was that an ending that was made with the idea that it would get leaked?
That's certainly possible. I did not think about that.
I mean, I don't think so, but
that's certainly possible.
Because wow, that's bad.
Yeah, terrible. Absolutely fucking terrible. And that was actually on the Blu-ray version that I had too. And it was terrible. Now the final ending is actually a very interesting final ending. It actually ends kind of like a Resident Evil game. The third, a more radical departure, was presented only in storyboards, which they once again did have on the Blu-ray and DVD release, with the storyboards included, which is really cool. But instead of being Frank being killed by soldiers after being infected, the other survivors tie him up and discover a research laboratory at the blockade, where Jim undergoes a blood transfusion in order to save Frank. Which I don't really know if that's apparently as far as they went along with it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was like some underground research facility. They had a monster that they had to kill, and then the lab blew up, like I said, like in a fucking Resident Evil game. Because that sounds like the ending of a Resident Evil game. That
sounds like you're being led into like a final boss dungeon, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. So, but either way, I am really glad the movie ended with both the theatrical and the original ending are definitely the two better ones, in my opinion, by quite a bit.
Well, those are both endings. Like, obviously, the dream thing sucks, but the other ending also doesn't really make this work as a self-contained story to me.
It does not.
It makes it one of those movies that is like setting up a sequel, which, even though I know this movie begot a franchise, I never like when movies do that. Even if the movie's good and the sequels are good, like, this does feel like a very self-contained movie.
Yes, although you said franchise, now, to be fair, I have not watched 28 Weeks Later, but there's only one other movie called 28 Weeks Later.
I thought there was a third one for some reason.
There is not. It's been stuck in development hell forever, which is kind of surprising because this movie obviously was a very, very good financial box office success. And I think 28 Weeks Later was quite a box office success too. So I'm kind of surprised.
It seems like, I mean, this seems to have a lot more natural potential for wider universe spin-offs than a lot more horror films have gotten a lot of fucking sequels.
Exactly. So the fact that it did not make a giant franchise is actually kind of surprising, although good, obviously.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, so that is the plot synopsis for this film. So before we get into reviews, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Not really. I think I'm coming to this film with probably a perspective that I know it seems like you've had for a long time, and probably anyone that's listening to the show, this seems like a movie that anyone that likes our show probably would like. For most of my life, I really think I disliked this movie, as I recall. I'm watching it now, I'm like, oh, why? This is a really solid, it's not quite my type of horror movie, but it's really well done. It's really smart. It's pretty, I wouldn't say it's scary, but it's consistently creepy. There's a nice sense of foreboding in it. And kind of a lot more, maybe not depth isn't the right word, but there's a lot more kind of like creative kind of variety in the influences it's taking and what it's informed by than I had thought. I kind of dismissed it out of hand as I was watching it, basically, 20 years ago now almost.
Yeah. So I do agree with that. I think this is a movie that, once again, I think has aged very well. It's a movie that I've gotten much more of an appreciation for over the years. I think it's a movie that's very, once again, prescient for modern times. Once again, we're in a post-COVID pandemic world, although obviously COVID didn't kill nearly as many people as the rage virus would have presumably killed as many. But at the same time, it is, I think, a lesson to be learned and understood that, like, at any time, society is incredibly fragile. And like polite society is incredibly even more fragile. Like the idea that once the world starts falling apart, like I don't have quite the bleak level of sort of post-apocalyptic doom that a lot of people who like this type of like media as myself do. I think there would be a lot more cooperation than people would give it credit for. But I do think in the near term, a lot of awful shit like this would happen.
Well, and I think like, and I don't know what the filmmakers' beliefs are, like morally or ideologically. I do think that this is a very bleak film, and I think it's effective. I'm glad that it is that. I would say, as far as my personal feelings about humanity, I probably align a little bit closer to, like, say, Romero or John Carpenter, who, maybe it's not, who do both have done a lot of kind of post-apocalyptic or like big, like kind of bleak, worst case scenario, worst of human nature scenario things. But I think both maybe see a bit more kind of a fundamental goodness to like the average person. Mm-hmm. And not to say that there aren't good, because there are good and likable characters in this movie, but I don't think that this movie takes that as a given. And maybe emotionally that maybe makes it ring a little bit less strong with me, but I actually think that as far as like, if something like this were to happen, how would it play out? This is probably one of the more realistic movies.
I agree with that, especially a pandemic that would essentially like wipe out, and not even necessarily wipe out like death, because we don't obviously see, like, we don't see a lot of bodies in this movie. So theoretically, a lot of people could have just simply been evacuated somewhere else. And just a handful of people that stuck around just simply weren't able to be evacuated. You do hear certain things like, all the planes out of here, there wasn't enough money in the world. That's what Selena's first person with her in the movie says along those lines, essentially, that like, I tried paying like $20,000 for a plane ticket and I couldn't even get out of here. So
pretty chilling, and again, a pretty prescient line.
Oh, very much that, he says like, it doesn't matter how much money you have in the world, like it becomes worthless essentially in the apocalypse, which is essentially the sort of message from that statement, which is true. I mean, like,
yeah,
and obviously even, I'm going to joke about fiat currency for a second, but like, even if it's backed in gold, like money is inherently worthless. Like the second that all this shit happens, like all the money in the world won't save you from the apocalypse, essentially.
Of course, that's why all these fucking demons like Elon Musk and all these morons want to colonize Mars. It's because they know that it's not zombies. They know something's happening here. And exactly. They know that when that happens, they need to have a new place where money can mean something again.
Absolutely. So, oh God. But yes,
I bummed myself out a little bit.
No, it's all good. I think it's very prescient, considering that is also another distinct possibility for the apocalypse, is tech bro apocalypse.
Sam Bankman-Fried is so hot.
He's so fucking hot, dude. I saw a Zoom call with him once, and like he looked up, and like kind of like like his eyes were rolling to the camera. Dude literally looked like a demon. It's just like straight up. There's like a screenshot of him he literally looks like a fucking demon. It's
if
wild.
You can find that, you should please send it to me. You've heard these stories. Sorry, I won't switch it. You've seen the stories about him playing video games during financial meetings and his potential investors being like, this guy must be the biggest genius in the world. He's wearing dirty sweatpants and he's playing video games while we're trying to talk to him.
Fucking wild shit. Oh God. But that will be the apocalypse. Either tech bro apocalypse or disease, where like somebody in some fucking meat market didn't clean meat enough, and then everybody dies of an infection. Those are the most likely apocalypses.
I hope it's the Disney Bros.
I hope
Please,
so
God.
too.
I want it so badly to be not the Tech Bros.
Yeah.
Take me before them.
Exactly. All right, but yeah, without further ado, let's get into some Amazon reviews. Now, I only have 3 today, mainly because the other 2 there weren't a lot of great negative reviews, so I decided not to include negative reviews on here. But the first Amazon review we have from here is from Dirty Frank 603, who says 5 stars. Great movie. Exactly what I expect would happen if a killer virus was let loose on the population. Which, Dirty Frank, I don't really want to know what you think of much of anything beyond this. Because
I just like that his name is Dirty Frank.
Honestly, like calling like Dirty and then a guy's name after that, like most of them are obviously really weird, but Dirty Frank is one of the most horrifying combinations of those 2.
Well, like, do you think he means like he's sexually like a dirty guy? Or do you think he means he's like Pigpen from Peanuts, just like a cloud of dust around him?
I'm really gonna assume it's like Frank Reynolds kind of Dirty Frank, in my opinion. But I could be wrong. I don't know.
Maybe it is him. Exactly what I would think would happen.
Yeah, right. Next review we have here is from Farnham and Whale, which is a very interesting name.
What is that, a circus troupe?
Yeah, right. You like Barnum and Bailey, Farnham and Whale, exactly. That's Barnum and Bailey, but for like sea creatures, exactly.
That is like this person like 1,000,000 years old.
Yeah. But they also gave it 5 stars, and it says polarized reviews, one from the less heard side. And the description of this review says, "This is a unique film in many ways. It was shot on digital. It is based on imagery rather than dialogue. It was absolutely beautiful. Its philosophical perspectives were ambivalent and well-developed, and her introduction to the protagonist is essentially over 5 minutes of silence. I was sad to see that one of the reviewers spent the movie focused on the commercial items in it. Not only did I find the product placement to be highly irrelevant criterion upon which to denounce the film, but I thought junk food played its role well, adding more than a little irony to the apocalyptic atmosphere. In the end, we will die or become undead, but soda lives forever."
Okay, like, this is not a bad review. I think I agree with this person mostly, Parnum or whoever, Arnhem, but maybe take it down a notch, buddy.
Exactly. Yeah, right.
You gotta talk with that.
Also, I thought
probably agree.
Yeah. Also, I thought the placement of a few commercial items was a small price to pay for this independent film. Had its initial production been backed by a large studio, we could have said goodbye to the Valium and name brand English chocolates, but we would have most likely also had to live without the gorgeous cinematography, pictorial narrative style, brief male nudity, wonderful soundtrack, imagination and suspense. If you are squeamish, yes, this movie is a bad idea, but it's probably still worth it anyways. Now, I do mostly agree with that review. However, I don't think the male nudity one is true. And I know, obviously, Europe's a little bit different than America when it comes to nudity, obviously. But at the same time, I think that a production company, if they knew that it was a horror movie where a guy gets naked a bunch, they might not want to sponsor it.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Although I would say I agree that actually showing frontal dick in a mainstream genre picture, yeah, that is a daring choice. Or it certainly was in the early 2000s. Maybe a little less now.
Oh, no, for sure. I mean, like, one of the only major movies I can think of that I've seen recently that had a lot of male nudity in it was fucking Jackass 4. So, like, this... But, like, that's the thing is that, obviously female nudity in movies, I think, female nudity in movies is definitely going the way of the dinosaur, too. But definitely male nudity is for sure not in the question anymore.
Well, my big reference point for this, for how absurdly afraid of male nudity that, films, non-pornographic, quote-unquote, films are, is, you ever seen Cronenberg's Crash?
I have it on Blu-ray, and that's one of the next movies I'm going to watch.
I love that movie. I love that movie. I would be more than happy to rewatch it with you at some point. It's just, even outside of the podcast, we can talk about it, because I haven't watched it in a while. I love it. You don't really see any dick in that. Well, you a little bit, but not really as much. Then the whole movie's about fucking.
Yes.
It's literally a bunch of sex scenes, and then car crashes. And there's not very much dick in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a movie, it just doesn't make sense anatomically.
where it's like, so it's clear there is like a resistance from, genre, not that Crash is really a genre film, but like studio films or whatever, to show that. So I guess that probably was a big deal in 03 or 02.
No, for sure. So I'm glad that they did it. Not obviously just because they have Cillian Murphy in it, because he is once again an attractive man.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is a very interesting thing because, like I said, it is not a thing you see in almost any movie, is any kind of male nudity at all, let alone so full frontal and ass is actually pretty impressive.
And this is a pretty it's got a pretty broad audience. This isn't like a very niche film.
And it's not like it definitely didn't ruin Cillian Murphy's career. This was his breakout movie. So like,
yeah,
it's obviously a little male nudity is not going to fucking kill, especially from an attractive guy. It's not going to kill anybody's career.
Really, that's probably why, maybe, if you are right on the cusp of breaking out and being a big star, show a little dick,
Well, talk about who did that, is Stallone did that famously before Rocky. So
that's true, and that's what got him. The writer of Rocky saw that screenplay and was like, "Hey, I like this Stallone guy. Get him this script." Kidding, you guys. I know.
I was actually going to ask if that was true, because I would have been like, "Holy shit, that's awesome!" But
no. Stallone wrote Rocky while he was living in a car.
Oh, that's true. He did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last review we have is from Christina L. Kirkland. I believe she created the Kirkland brand, although I could be wrong about that.
So she's bankrupt now.
Yeah, she's she also gave this movie 5 stars, and her review says, "The perfect movie to watch in the middle of a pandemic," which is, once again, something I really want to reiterate. This movie
is not what I wanted to watch in the fucking pandemic. Everyone that was watching all that shit, this and Train to Busan, which was a great movie. Great. But like, I was not watching this for those first few months. I was watching like The Simpsons, and I don't know, like, people are insane.
Yeah, in my opinion, this is either a movie that, depending on your preferences, is either perfect or horrifying to watch during COVID. I would say probably horrifying to watch during COVID, because this movie predicted a lot of shit. But her review says, "If you're purchasing this film on DVD or Blu-ray, don't expect to improve the quality of the visuals. The majority of the movie was not shot on 35mm. The grainy, lo-fi quality of the film was an intentional decision by the director to immerse the viewer in post-apocalyptic grit. And frankly, the apocalyptic vision hits close to home during the current COVID crisis." I fully agree with her. I do think that once again, as I mentioned earlier, as I detailed earlier in this review, that the grainy lo-fi quality of the film, for the vast majority of it, was a purposeful decision. So I don't really think it was a problem. I was kind of annoyed by it at first, but then I read more about it and saw the intentions, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's fine. It doesn't bother me at all.
I definitely noticed it upon this recent watching, but it didn't bother me. I mean, I was just kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe this just was shot, on lower res or something. And then when you say that, it just makes me think like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like, I'm down.
Yeah, and personally, I would say to the audience at home, if you do want to watch this movie, I would recommend watching it in lower definition, which is not a common recommendation, but
yeah,
trying to watch it in 1080p, it's kind of like playing a Super NES game on like a giant plasma TV. Like, it's just, you miss a lot of the finer details, and it's also generally a less enjoyable experience. So once again, I would recommend watching this on a very low quality rip, like either 240 or 360p style. I think the movie actually looks a lot better in that. Because if you're playing a Super NES to GameCube, even
all the graphics run together, they look all fucked up.
Exactly. And if you play it on like an older TV, like the scan lines align perfectly because it was meant to be played on at max a 480p television.
It adds texture, and it adds, like the illusion of a third dimension in some aspects, that you completely lose.
Well, not even oh no, wait, the GameCube actually did support 480p. But max originally GameCube was 480i, which is a step below 480p. But either way, yeah, definitely a movie that you want to watch max 480p to really get a very enjoyable visual experience out of this. But yeah, those are all the reviews. And the one thing I wanted to mention about the negative reviews, which were, like I said, they weren't a lot of very good negative reviews, so I didn't include them in here. But the one thing I noticed is that people were complaining about stereotypes and racism a lot in the negative reviews, which I don't understand that criticism at all.
I don't know. I don't.
There was a couple of them that clarified it, and it was like, oh, there was a black character who died, which was one of the soldiers, and then the tied up mailer character is black too. But the thing is that they said, oh, he's one of the first people to die, and it's like, no, he's actually one of the last people to die, actually. And also one of the survivors of this movie is a black woman. So like, what the fuck? Like,
who's very well defined, especially for the time of scale, but just in general, it's not characterized as a black woman or whatever that might.
She's an extremely well characterized character.
Yeah, she's the best character in this movie, I would say. Like,
I would say so too. I agree with that. Like her and
that's kind of okay. Not trying to be one of those flip the script by your logic, guys. I'm really not. I think that if your takeaway from that is more this movie's racist because a black character dies, and you almost don't even seem to care about like this really cool character who's like a black lady that's in the movie, that maybe you aren't as attuned to those things. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I don't know who wrote this review. You know what I mean?
I saw that in like 3 or 4 reviews, and I'm like, what the fuck are you people talking about? Like, I just genuinely don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't know. And if anyone listens to this and there's something that we're missing, and you think, oh shit, no, there's this part today, then please explain it to me. I'd like to know.
Yes, please.
Because if there's multiple reviews saying that, I'm like, why? Like, what? I don't know.
Yeah, no. And then the other criticism I saw was a lot of people were comparing this to The Exorcist for some reason.
What?
Which that is even maybe less explainable than the racism one. I just don't understand that at all.
Well, that's not they have red eyes because Reagan has reddish eyes when she's possessed.
Some people are saying this was overrated in comparison to The Exorcist, and I'm like, who said this was comparable to The Exorcist?
Okay. So I don't want to go off on it. Exorcist is not that good. It's a very well-made movie. I don't give a shit about it. That's horror for people that don't like horror. It's that elevated horror bullshit again. Yeah. I know I've talked about it before on here. It's not that fucking scary. I'm not fucking Catholic, so I don't care about it.
Yeah, no, exactly, right?
Like, the book is pretty scary. You just want to get a little bit more time in Reagan McNeil's kind of psychosis. It's kind of interesting. And in Father Karras as well. But, like, that movie's not that fucking scary.
No,
okay?
and
even in the 70s, it wasn't that fucking scary. Peeping Tom came out in 1969. That's fucking scary.
No, yeah, no, granted, I actually do really like Catholic horror to a certain extent. Not necessarily the
me
demons
too.
And stuff, but like the more like social sort of Catholic horror stuff I like quite a bit.
Prince Darkness, Rosemary's Baby, that's good shit.
Yes, exactly. But like the just straight up demon stuff, like, nah, I don't really care about that at all.
It's not even that I think Exorcist is bad. I'm so sick of this is the greatest horror movie, and I'm going to compare every horror movie to it. Then you don't fucking like horror.
Exactly.
That's a fucking horror movie for like fucking people that like are on like in like at the American Film Institute or whatever.
Yeah, I will say
that's not be for horror. You're dumbass.
I will say you're shitting on elevated horror, which I do like elevated horror, but I do think people get way too up their ass about it.
No, I like a lot of elevated horror. I'm just sick of. I do think I encounter people who don't really like horror and think that they're above it. We talk about this with new metal, like you and I do, personally.
Yeah.
You know, people that like Deftones or Slither Down, and they go, but that's not really new metal. It's like, yes, it is.
So one thing I will say is Scream 5. So in the original Scream with Drew Barrymore, and she gets killed by Ghostface. In that movie, the first victim of Scream 5, or at least one of the first ones, dies because she only knows elevated horror. Which is a pretty funny scene.
That's awesome. I haven't seen that yet, but oh my god, that owns.
All right. So yep.
Is that for real? That's
no, I'm serious. That actually does happen. Yeah.
Oh my god, that owns.
I actually just bought that on Blu-ray, also along with X. I'm gonna watch X very soon.
You have seen it, right?
I have not. No, I have not.
Oh my god. Yeah, see X and then see Pearl. Oh
Will do.
Fucking god.
I'm excited for it. But yes, that is the end of the review here. We're running out of time because Brian wants to see Silent Night, Deadly Night 5.
That's how I know I was just saying that I don't like elevated horror, and now I'm going to see an elevated horror film.
Yeah, Silent and Deadly Night 5. Very elevated. The
Toy Maker.
Yeah, Mickey Rooney was definitely the king of elevated horror for sure. Rest in peace to Mickey Rooney.
Friend
I
of
would
the
argue
pod.
his role in Breakfast at Tiffany's was very elevated horror. That's for sure.
It was elevated. It elevated a whole race.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Shit. But yes, this is Taylor signing off. Have a good one.
On that note, I'm gonna go.
All right. Have a good night.
Night, everyone.